When Miles Carter's fingers touched the grand piano at the Whitmore Holdings Christmas party, he had no idea that one haunting melody would shatter the carefully constructed walls of the city's most untouchable CEO, or that the song everyone believed belonged to a dead man would expose secrets capable of destroying everything he'd built for his daughter. If you want to know how a maintenance worker's lullaby became the truth that brought an empire to its knees, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The lobby of Whitmore Holdings glittered like a frozen cathedral on Christmas Eve, all crystal chandeliers and marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Miles Carter stood in the corner near the service entrance, a gray uniform marking him as invisible among the sea of designer suits and cocktail dresses. His calloused hands gripped a maintenance cart, but his eyes tracked something far more precious, a small figure in a red velvet dress weaving through the crowd like a cardinal in snow. "Lily," he called softly, his voice lost beneath the swell of orchestral music pouring from hidden speakers. "Lily, stay close." His daughter turned, her dark curls bouncing, her smile bright enough to shame the chandeliers overhead. 7 years old and fearless in a way that both terrified and amazed him. She waved, then disappeared behind a cluster of executives debating fourth-quarter projections. Miles exhaled slowly, forcing down the familiar anxiety that lived in his chest like a stone. 3 years working maintenance at Whitmore Holdings. 3 years of keeping his head down, his daughter safe, his past buried. 3 years of being nobody, which was exactly what he needed to be. The Christmas party wasn't for people like him. The invitation extended to all Whitmore Holdings family members was corporate politeness, nothing more. But Lily had begged, her small hands pressed together, her dark eyes wide with hope. "Please, Daddy, just for an hour. I want to see the big Christmas tree. I want to hear the music." How could he say no? How could he deny her this one glimpse of magic when he'd already taken so much from her? A stable home, a mother who'd walked away when the medical bills started piling up, a father whose crushed hand had ended the future he'd promised to build for them both. So here they were, ghosts at the feast. "Mr. Carter?" A sharp voice cut through his thoughts. Margaret Voss, the facilities manager, appeared at his elbow like a summoned spirit. Her expression suggested she'd just discovered something unpleasant on the bottom of her shoe. "I need you in the executive restroom on 12. Someone's clogged the sink with cocktail garnishes." "I'm watching my daughter. The party ends at 9. You're still on duty until 10. Margaret's smile was thin and joyless. "Surely your child can manage 20 minutes unsupervised." Miles looked toward where he'd last seen Lily, but the crowd had shifted, and she was nowhere in sight. His heart kicked against his ribs. "I'll take her with me." "Absolutely not. Executive floor is restricted." Margaret was already walking away, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown. 20 minutes, Mr. Carter. Don't make me regret allowing you to bring her in the first place." The crowd swallowed her up, and Miles stood there, caught between the job that barely kept them fed and the daughter who was everything. He scanned the lobby again, finally spotting Lily near the enormous Christmas tree, her small face tilted back to study the angel at the top. He made his way through the crowd, crouching down when he reached her. "Lil, I have to go upstairs for a few minutes. I need you to stay right here by this tree. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. Okay?" Her face fell. "But Daddy—" "I'll be quick. I promise." He kissed her forehead, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "Count the ornaments. Count them twice. I'll be back before you finish." She nodded reluctantly, and he forced himself to stand, to walk away, to leave her there among strangers. Every step felt like betrayal. The elevator to the executive floor seemed to move in slow motion. Miles stared at his reflection in the polished doors, a man of 32 who looked 40, exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, his dark hair already threading with premature gray. His right hand, the one that had once coaxed miracles from piano keys, rested against his leg, 2 fingers still slightly crooked from where the machinery had crushed them. He'd stopped looking at it years ago, stopped remembering what those hands used to do. The executive restroom was a study in excess. Italian marble, gold fixtures, ambient lighting designed to make everyone look like they'd just returned from a spa. Miles found the clogged sink, assessed the problem, and started working. Maraschino cherries, orange peels, and what appeared to be an entire lime wedge had created a dam in the drain. He worked methodically, his mind half on the task, half on the clock ticking down the minutes until he could get back to Lily. 15 minutes. 12. 10. He was drying his hands when the screaming started. Miles hit the lobby at a dead run, his work boots skidding on marble as he burst from the stairwell. The festive atmosphere had shattered. Guests had formed a loose circle near the Christmas tree, their faces painted with various shades of concern and morbid curiosity. At the center of the circle, a small figure in red velvet lay on the floor. "Lily!" He shoved through the crowd without apology, dropping to his knees beside his daughter. She was crying, clutching her knee where blood seeped through torn tights. Relief and rage warred in his chest. She was conscious, moving, alive. But someone had let this happen. Someone had failed to notice a 7-year-old girl alone in a crowd of oblivious adults. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." He gathered her carefully against his chest, checking for other injuries with hands that had stopped shaking only through years of practice. "What happened?" "I was trying to see the angel better," she sobbed. "I climbed on the bench and I slipped and let me through." A new voice, cold and commanding as winter itself. The crowd parted immediately, and Miles looked up to see a woman descending the grand staircase like a queen surveying conquered territory. Vivian Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Holdings, the woman whose name hung on the building, whose face appeared in Forbes and Fortune and the business section of every newspaper in the country. Miles had seen her exactly 4 times in 3 years, always at a distance, always surrounded by people who looked like they'd been selected for their ability to make her look even more untouchable by comparison. She was 35, tall and slim as a blade, dressed in a black gown that probably cost more than Miles made in 6 months. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a severe style that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. High cheekbones, pointed chin, eyes the color of smoke in winter. Beautiful in the way that ice sculptures were beautiful. Perfect, cold, and entirely removed from anything warm or human. Those gray eyes fixed on Miles and Lily with an expression he couldn't read. "What happened here?" "My daughter slipped and fell." Miles kept his voice steady, but his arms tightened around Lily. "I'm taking her to get cleaned up. She's bleeding on a 15th century Persian rug." The voice came from behind Vivian, a man in an immaculate charcoal suit, his blonde hair styled with mathematical precision, his handsome face wearing an expression of profound distaste. "Perhaps the maintenance staff should keep better track of their children. This is a corporate event, not a daycare." Miles felt Lily flinch against him, felt his own jaw clench hard enough to hurt. He recognized the man, Graham Pierce, Vivian's fiancé, senior vice president of acquisitions, and generally regarded as the second most powerful person in the building. Pierce had the kind of face that appeared on billboards advertising luxury watches, all sharp lines and aristocratic contempt. "She's 7 years old," Miles said quietly. "She fell. It's not a crime." "No, but bringing children to adult events demonstrates questionable judgment." Pierce smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Though I suppose we can't expect much judgment from someone who makes their living unclogging toilets." The lobby had gone quiet. Miles could feel dozens of eyes on them, witnessing his humiliation. This was how it always went. People like Graham Pierce could say anything, do anything, because people like Miles Carter didn't matter. They were scenery. Obstacles. Problems to be cleaned up and forgotten. He started to stand, to gather Lily and walk away with whatever dignity he could salvage, when Vivian Whitmore spoke. "Graham." Her voice could have frozen nitrogen. "Apologize." Pierce blinked, his smile flickering. "I'm sorry?" "I said apologize." Vivian descended the last few steps, moving to stand beside Miles and Lily. Up close, she was even more intimidating, not because of her beauty, but because of the absolute authority that radiated from her like cold fire. "A child is injured, and you're worried about a rug. Apologize. Now." "Vivian, I'm not asking what you think." Her eyes never left Pierce's face, and Miles watched the man's composure crack, just slightly, just enough to reveal the anger underneath. "I'm telling you to apologize to Mr. Carter and his daughter for being needlessly cruel, or you can leave. Your choice." The silence stretched taut as wire. Miles could see Pierce calculating, weighing his options, deciding how much pride was worth in this particular moment. Finally, the man's jaw worked, and he produced something that might generously be called an apology if you squinted hard enough. "My apologies," Pierce said flatly. "I spoke in haste. To the child as well." Pierce's eyes darkened, but he bent slightly at the waist, addressing Lily with the warmth of someone reading terms and conditions. "And to you, young lady, I hope you feel better soon." Lily pressed her face against Miles's shoulder, saying nothing. Vivian turned to Miles, and he found himself looking into those gray eyes from less than 3 feet away. They were the strangest eyes he'd ever seen, not cold exactly, despite the Ice Queen reputation. Distant, fortified. Eyes that had seen something terrible and had built walls accordingly. "Take your daughter to the executive lounge on 22, she said. "There's a full first aid kit in the bathroom. Lock the door if you need privacy. Stay as long as necessary." Miles stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "The executive lounge is—" "I know what it is. I'm the CEO." A ghost of something that might have been amusement crossed her face. "Consider it an apology for my fiancé's behavior. And for the rug comment, it's insured, and more importantly, it's just a rug." She held his gaze for another moment, and Miles felt something strange pass between them. Not recognition exactly, but a sense of seeing and being seen that was somehow more intimate than anything physical. Then she turned away, addressing the crowd in a voice that cut through murmurs like a blade through silk. "The party continues, everyone back to enjoying themselves. Graham, you're with me. We need to discuss appropriate behavior at corporate functions." She walked away without looking back, Pierce trailing behind her like a scolded dog. The crowd began to disperse, their collective attention moving on to more entertaining dramas. Miles sat on the marble floor, holding his daughter, trying to process what had just happened. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was small against his chest. "Is my knee going to be okay?" "Yeah, baby. It's going to be fine." He stood carefully, lifting her with him. "Let's go get you cleaned up." The executive lounge on 22 was like stepping into a different world, all leather furniture and warm wood paneling, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city. Miles had never been above the 15th floor before. This was where the real power lived, where decisions that affected thousands of lives were made over scotch and handshakes. He found the bathroom, luxurious and spotless, and settled Lily on the marble counter. The first aid kit was exactly where Vivian had said it would be, stocked with enough supplies to handle a small emergency. He cleaned the scrape carefully, Lily wincing but staying brave, her small hand gripping his shoulder. "It's not so bad," he told her, applying antibiotic ointment with gentle fingers. "You'll have a cool bandage to show your friends." "Daddy?" She was studying his face with those two knowing eyes, the ones that sometimes made him forget she was only 7. Why was that mean man so angry? Miles thought about how to answer that, how to explain a world that measured worth in dollars and status, where kindness was a commodity and cruelty just another business strategy. "Some people," he said finally, "think they're better than other people because they have more money or fancier titles. They forget that everyone matters." "But you matter, Daddy." His throat tightened. "Yeah, Lil, I matter. And you matter more than anything in the whole world." He finished bandaging her knee, then lifted her down from the counter. She immediately spotted the grand piano in the corner of the lounge, a Steinway, black and gleaming, probably worth more than every car in the parking garage combined. "Daddy, look!" She pulled free of his hand, running to the piano with the resilience of childhood, her injury already forgotten in the face of wonder. "Can you play it, please?" Miles's stomach dropped. "Lily, we should go. Just one song." "Please?" She was already climbing onto the bench, her small hands hovering over the keys without touching them. "You never play anymore." "I miss hearing you play." "Baby, this isn't our piano. We can't." "Mrs. Whitmore said we could stay as long as we needed, and I need to hear you play." She looked at him with such naked hope that Miles felt his carefully constructed defenses crack. "Please, Daddy, just one song, the one you used to play for Mommy." The one he used to play for her mother. The one he'd written in another lifetime, when his hands still worked properly, when he'd believed music could save him, could save them both. Before the accident, before the divorce, before everything fell apart and he'd learned that talent without luck was just another way to starve. He hadn't touched a piano in 3 years, hadn't let himself get close enough to remember what he'd lost. But Lily was looking at him like he'd hung the moon, and he'd already denied her so much. What harm could one song do? Miles sat beside her on the bench, his heart hammering against his ribs. The piano gleamed under the warm lighting, keys pristine and perfectly maintained. He lifted his hands, positioned them over the keys, and felt the familiar weight of memory crash over him. The conservatory. The endless practice sessions. The night he'd played for her. For Vivian Whitmore. Though he'd only known her as Vivian Reed then, and she'd only been 22 and everything had seemed possible. No. He pushed the thought away, buried it where it belonged. His fingers found the opening notes, muscle memory taking over where courage failed. The song spilled out, different from how he'd intended, shaped by 3 years of silence and loss and the crooked fingers that no longer moved quite right. It was still beautiful, even damaged. He could make beauty, but it was a broken kind of beautiful, a melody haunted by everything it used to be. Lily leaned against his side, her eyes drifting closed, a small smile on her face. Miles played and tried not to remember, tried not to think about the conservatory, about the boy named Evan Hale who'd been his only real friend, about the girl they'd both loved in their different ways. Tried not to think about the song Evan had started writing for her. The opening movement, brilliant and passionate and full of hope that neither of them had been old enough to know was temporary. Tried not to think about how, after Evan died in that stupid, pointless accident, Miles had finished the song, had poured all his grief and guilt and desperate unspoken love into the closing movement, then given it all to Evan's memory because Evan had loved her first, had loved her openly, had deserved something beautiful to be remembered by. The song had been Evan's gift to Vivian Reed. Miles had just been the hands that completed it. He'd never told anyone, had let Evan take the credit, had watched from a distance as the brilliant, promising young composer was mourned and celebrated, had accepted his own role as nobody, which had always been easier than admitting he'd loved her too, that he still loved her, even now, even after everything. The melody shifted, moving into the final movement, the part Evan had never written, the part that belonged entirely to Miles. It was darker than the opening, more complex, built on themes of loss and longing and the kind of love that knew it would never be returned. It was the song of someone standing in shadows, watching light move in rooms they'd never enter. It was the truest thing he'd ever written. He played the final notes, let them hang in the air like smoke, then lowered his hands to his lap. His right hand ached, the old injury protesting the unaccustomed use, but it was a distant pain, easy to ignore. Lily was asleep against his shoulder, her breathing soft and even. Miles sat there in the borrowed luxury of the executive lounge, holding his daughter, and tried to convince himself that playing the song had changed nothing. 22 floors below, in her corner office that overlooked the city like a general surveying a battlefield, Vivian Whitmore stood frozen at her window, one hand pressed against the glass as if she could hold herself upright through sheer force of will. The music had stopped 3 minutes ago. She'd counted every second since, her mind refusing to process what she'd heard, what it meant, what it made possible. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Evan was dead. Had been dead for 13 years. The song, his song, the one he'd written for her in their last spring together, had died with him, buried in memory and grief and all the futures that would never be. Except she'd just heard it. Every note. Including parts she'd never heard before, movements she'd thought existed only in Evan's imagination, melodies he'd described to her but never had the chance to finish. Someone had completed the song. Someone in this building, right now, knew music that should have died 13 years ago in a car accident on a rain-slicked road. Vivian? Graham appeared in her doorway, his expression carefully neutral after their earlier confrontation. Are you all right? You look pale. She didn't turn from the window, couldn't bear to see his face right now, couldn't bear to pretend any of this was normal. Did you hear the music just now? Music? I heard piano playing, if that's what you mean. Some Christmas carol, I think. No. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, coming from somewhere far away. Not a Christmas carol, something else. Graham moved closer, and she could see his reflection in the glass. Concerned, confused, already calculating whether this was a problem he needed to solve or merely weather. Are you feeling unwell? Perhaps the party was too much. We could leave early. I need to find whoever was playing. She turned from the window, her decision made before conscious thought caught up. The piano in the executive lounge, someone was just there. The executive lounge is restricted. I sent someone there, the maintenance worker and his daughter. The pieces were clicking together, impossible and undeniable. It was him. It had to be him. She was already moving, heading for the elevator. Graham calling after her with questions she didn't answer. The elevator ascended with agonizing slowness, and Vivian tried to organize her thoughts, to prepare for what she was going to say when she found him. How do you know the song? Where did you learn it? Who are you? The executive lounge was dark when she entered, the only light coming from the city through the windows. The piano sat in the corner, silent now, and for a moment Vivian thought she'd been wrong, that whoever had been playing was already gone. Then she saw them. The maintenance worker, Carter, she remembered, Miles Carter, sat at the piano bench with his daughter asleep in his arms. He was staring out the window at nothing, his profile lost in shadow, and something about the angle of his face, the line of his shoulders, sent recognition thrumming through her like a struck chord. She knew him. Somehow, impossibly, she knew him. Mr. Carter, she said quietly, not wanting to wake the child. He turned, and their eyes met across the darkness. For a moment, just a moment, she saw something flicker in his expression. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. Or something deeper that she didn't have a name for. Ms. Whitmore. He stood carefully, shifting his daughter's weight. We were just leaving. Thank you for letting us use the lounge. The song you were playing. She moved closer, studying his face in the dim light. What was it? His jaw tightened. Just something old. I don't remember the name. You're lying. The certainty surprised her, but she trusted it anyway. Vivian had built an empire on her ability to read people, to see through corporate smiles and calculated promises to the truth beneath. This man was lying, and badly. I know that song. I've known it for 13 years, and you just played parts of it that should not exist. Miles Carter said nothing, his arms tightening around his sleeping daughter, his eyes darting toward the elevator like he was calculating escape routes. Who taught you that song? Vivian demanded, her voice harder now. Where did you hear it? I need to take my daughter home. His voice was steady, but she could see the pulse jumping in his throat. It's late. She has school in the morning. Answer my question. I don't owe you answers, Ms. Whitmore. He met her eyes, and something in his gaze stopped her cold. It wasn't defiance, exactly. It was deeper than that, older. I'm just the maintenance worker who unclogs your toilets. I'm nobody. He moved past her toward the elevator, and Vivian stood paralyzed, her mind racing through impossibilities, trying to find one that made sense. Nobody. He'd said it like a fact, like something he'd repeated to himself so many times it had calcified into truth. But 13 years ago, there had been someone else who'd called himself nobody. A quiet boy at the conservatory, talented enough to stand in Evan's shadow, humble enough to never seek the spotlight. What was his name? Michael? Matthew? No. Miles. Miles something. The scholarship student who'd disappeared after Evan died, dropping out of the conservatory and vanishing like he'd never existed at all. The elevator doors opened and Miles Carter stepped inside with his sleeping daughter. Just before the doors closed, his eyes found hers one last time. Vivian stared at her own reflection in the polished elevator doors, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But 13 years ago, there had been two brilliant pianists at the conservatory. Everyone remembered Evan Hale, the golden boy who died too young. No one remembered his shadow, the quiet scholarship student who'd stood at the edges of every photo, never quite in focus. No one except Vivian, who'd caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. Who'd seen the way his hands moved over piano keys like he was praying? Who'd thought, once or twice in the golden haze of that last spring, that maybe those dark eyes saw her more clearly than Evan's ever did. She'd forgotten him after Evan died. Or maybe she'd chosen to forget, because remembering was just another kind of pain, and she'd already had more than enough. Her phone buzzed in her hand, Graham asking where she'd gone. Vivian looked at the message, then at the closed elevator doors, then at the piano where someone had just played a Dead Man's song with the hands of a ghost. Outside, snow had started to fall over the glittering city, covering everything in white, making the world look clean and new and full of dangerous possibilities. Vivian Whitmore stood in the executive lounge and felt the carefully constructed walls she'd built around her heart begin, just slightly, to crack. The snowfall had turned vicious by the time Miles got Lily home to their apartment in Riverside, the kind of wet, heavy snow that made the stairs treacherous and the world feel like it was closing in. He carried her up 3 flights, her dead weight warm against his chest, her breath soft against his neck. She didn't wake when he changed her into pajamas or when he tucked her into bed, pulling the worn blankets up to her chin. Miles stood in the doorway of her tiny bedroom, watching her sleep, and felt the weight of what he'd done settle over him like a shroud. He'd played the song. After 3 years of silence, of keeping his head down and his past buried, he'd sat at that piano and played the one piece of music that could destroy everything, because Vivian Whitmore had heard it, had recognized it. And even if she didn't remember him, Miles Carter, nobody from nowhere, the scholarship kid who'd loved her from such a distance he might as well have been invisible, she would remember the song, would know that someone in her building carried knowledge that shouldn't exist. He moved to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water he didn't drink, stared out the window at the snow erasing the city. His right hand ached, a deep throb that started in his mangled fingers and radiated up his forearm. He flexed it carefully, remembering how it used to feel before the accident at the Whitmore Holdings warehouse crushed it, back when his hands had been his future, his ticket out of poverty, his one gift that might have been enough. The accident had happened 6 months after he'd dropped out of the conservatory. He'd been working 3 jobs trying to keep himself afloat after losing his scholarship, after watching Evan's funeral from the back of the church, after deciding that some kinds of grief were too expensive to keep carrying. The warehouse job had paid better than the others, and he'd needed the money. Needed to not think. Needed to become someone who didn't play piano, didn't write music, didn't love people who would never love him back. The machinery had been old, the safety protocols ignored, the company more concerned with quarterly profits than worker safety. His hand had been caught, crushed, and by the time they'd freed him, 2 fingers were shattered, and the nerve damage extensive. The company, Whitmore Holdings, though he hadn't known it at the time, had settled quickly and quietly, paying just enough to cover his medical bills and buy his silence, not enough to call it justice. He'd taken the money, learned to live with the pain, and let go of the last thread connecting him to the person he used to be. Then Sarah had gotten pregnant, and for a brief window, Miles had thought maybe he could build something new. A family. A purpose. A life that didn't revolve around everything he'd lost. But Sarah had left when Lily was 3, when the medical bills from the complicated birth were still piling up, when she'd realized that loving a damaged man with no prospects was a different thing than she'd imagined. The divorce papers had arrived on a Tuesday. She'd moved to California and sent a birthday card to Lily every year, signed with her name and nothing else. Miles had stopped being angry about it somewhere around year 2. You couldn't be angry at someone for telling the truth. He was nobody. He had nothing, and Lily deserved better than what he could give her. But he was trying. Every day, he was trying. His phone buzzed on the counter, a text from an unknown number. Miles stared at it for a long moment before opening it. "Mr. Carter, this is Vivian Whitmore. I obtained your number from HR. We need to talk about the song you played tonight. My office, 8 a.m. tomorrow. This is not optional." Miles read it 3 times, his stomach dropping further with each pass. He typed out a response. "I don't know what you're talking about," then deleted it. Tried again. "I can't. I work mornings." Delete. "Please leave me alone." Delete. Finally, he just turned the phone off and went to bed, knowing he wouldn't sleep. He was right. He lay in the darkness, listening to Lily's soft breathing through the thin walls, and watched the hours tick past. At 4 a.m., he gave up and made coffee. At 5 a.m., he showered and dressed in his gray maintenance uniform. At 6 a.m., He kissed Lily's forehead and left her with Mrs. Chen downstairs, the elderly neighbor who watched her before school for $20 a week and whatever groceries Miles could spare. At 7:45 a.m., he was standing outside Vivian Whitmore's office, his heart hammering, his crushed hand clenched at his side. The door opened before he could knock. Vivian stood there in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent, her dark hair pulled back, her gray eyes sharp enough to cut. She looked like she'd slept about as well as he had. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming." She stepped back, gesturing him inside. "Please sit." The office was exactly what he'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, awards and accolades displayed with careful modesty. A space designed to intimidate, to remind visitors of the gulf between her world and theirs. Miles didn't sit. "Ms. Whitmore, I have work. I cleared it with Margaret. You have an hour." She moved to her desk, opened a laptop, and turned it to face him. The screen showed a photograph from 13 years ago, the conservatory's spring showcase. Evan Hale at the piano, brilliant and golden, the camera loving him. And in the background, barely visible, a dark-haired boy watching from the shadows. "That's you," Vivian said quietly. "Isn't it? Miles Carter. You were at the conservatory with Evan. You were his friend." Miles's throat had gone dry. "I knew him. We weren't friends." "Don't lie to me." Her voice was ice and stone. "I've spent all night going through old photos, old programs, anything I could find from that year. You were there. You studied piano. You were good enough for a full scholarship, and then Evan died and you disappeared. A lot of people left after the accident. Not like you did. One day you were there, the next you were gone. No forwarding address, no contact information, like you'd never existed." She closed the laptop, leaned against her desk, studying him with those unsettling gray eyes. "Why? I needed the money more than the degree. I dropped out, that's all." "And the song? The one you played last night?" Miles forced himself to meet her gaze. "I don't know what you mean." "That song was Evan's. He wrote it for me the spring before he died. He played me the first movement, told me he'd finish it for my birthday." Her voice cracked, just slightly, just enough to reveal the pain beneath. "But he died 2 weeks before my birthday, and the song died with him. Except last night, I heard the whole thing, every note, including movements Evan never lived to write." The silence stretched between them, full of everything Miles couldn't say. Finally, Vivian spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did Evan finish it before he died? Did he give you the rest?" It would be so easy to say yes, to give her that story, let Evan be the hero he'd always been. But Miles had learned the hard way that some lies were too expensive to maintain. "No," he said quietly. "Evan only wrote the first movement, the rest is mine." Vivian's face went white. "What?" "He started the song for you. The opening movement, that was all him. Brilliant, just like everything he did." Miles looked away, unable to watch her face while he spoke. "But he died before he could finish it, so I completed it. The second and third movements. I wrote them after the funeral, and I never told anyone because it felt wrong to take credit for something that was supposed to be his gift to you." "You wrote it." Vivian's voice was strange, hollow. "You finished Evan's song." "It was presumptuous, I know that. But I couldn't let it stay unfinished. Couldn't let that be how he was remembered, by something incomplete." He forced himself to look at her again. "So I finished it, and I let everyone think it was all his, because he loved you, and he deserved to be remembered for something beautiful." Vivian stared at him like he was a stranger, speaking a foreign language. Why would you? She stopped, shook her head. "I don't understand. If you wrote those movements, why hide it? Why let Evan take the credit?" "Because I was nobody, Ms. Whitmore. I was the scholarship kid from the wrong neighborhood with the wrong clothes and the wrong everything. And Evan was golden. He was the one who deserved to be remembered. I was just the person who happened to know how to finish what he started." "That's not nothing." Her voice had gone sharp again, defensive. "That's not nobody. It was 13 years ago. It doesn't matter now." "It matters to me." She moved closer, and Miles fought the urge to step back, to maintain the distance that had always existed between people like her and people like him. Evan's song is the only thing I have left of that time. The only thing I kept when I walked away from music and built all this instead. She gestured vaguely at the office, the empire beyond. And now you're telling me that half of it, the best half, the parts that always made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely alone in the world, came from someone I don't even remember. You weren't supposed to remember me. That was the point. Well, I'm remembering now. Vivian's eyes were bright, too bright, and Miles realized with distant horror that she was fighting tears. I'm remembering a quiet boy who sat in the back of theory classes and never raised his hand even though he always knew the answers. I'm remembering someone who played Chopin like he was having a conversation with ghosts. I'm remembering the way you looked at me sometimes when you thought no one was watching. Miles felt his face go hot. Don't. She held up a hand, her composure cracking further. Don't insult me by pretending you didn't care. I saw you, Miles. Not often, not clearly, but I saw you. And then Evan died, and you disappeared, and I thought... Her voice broke. I thought everyone who'd mattered from that time was gone. I didn't matter, Ms. Whitmore. I was just there. Stop saying that! The shout surprised them both. Vivian turned away, pressing her hands against the desk like she needed the physical support. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but no less intense. Stop telling me you didn't matter. You wrote half the song that got me through the worst year of my life. You gave me something beautiful when everything else had turned to ashes. That matters. You matter. Miles stood frozen, every instinct screaming at him to run, to get out before this conversation went somewhere he couldn't afford to follow. I need to get back to work. No, not yet. Vivian straightened, wiping at her eyes with careful fingers. I need to know why you're here. Of all the places you could work in this city, why Whitmore Holdings? Why hide yourself in maintenance when you could have been... What? A concert pianist? Miles laughed, the sound bitter even to his own ears. With what hands, Ms. Whitmore? He held up his right hand, let her see the crooked fingers, the scars that ran across his palm. 6 years ago, I was working in one of your warehouses. Old equipment, bad safety protocols, management that cared more about productivity than people. The machinery caught my hand, crushed it. The company settled quietly, paid my medical bills, gave me just enough to make me go away. I lost the use of 2 fingers and most of the strength in my grip. My concert career ended before it started. Vivian stared at his damaged hand, her face going pale. One of our warehouses? I didn't know it was yours at the time. Just knew it was some corporate giant that valued its reputation more than its workers. The settlement came through Whitmore Holdings, but I never connected it to you until later. When I needed work and saw you were hiring maintenance staff, I figured. He shrugged. Figured I'd already bled for this company. Might as well let it feed my daughter. Your daughter. Vivian's voice had gone soft again. Lily, she's yours. She's everything. The words came out fierce, protective. And this job, it's not much, but it's steady. Keeps her fed and clothed and safe. That's what matters now, not music, not the past. Just making sure she has a chance at the kind of future I lost. Vivian was silent for a long moment, her gaze moving from his face to his ruined hand and back again. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made Miles's chest tighten. I didn't know. About the warehouse accident, about the settlement. I would have been 28, newly promoted to VP, trying to prove I deserved the position on merit, and not just because of my last name. I wasn't involved in operations or HR issues. I'm not asking for an apology, Ms. Whitmore. It happened. It's done. But it's not done, is it? She moved closer, and Miles could smell her perfume. Something subtle and expensive that reminded him of winter gardens. You're working in my building, taking care of your daughter alone, and every day you walk past what you could have been. That's not done. That's torture. It's life. People don't always get what they want. No, Vivian agreed quietly. They don't. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting for what's right. She returned to her desk, pulled out a business card, and wrote something on the back before handing it to him. My personal number. I want you to think about something. I have connections in the music world, teaching positions, therapy programs for musicians with disabilities, opportunities that might let you use what you have left. Miles looked at the card without taking it. I don't need charity. It's not charity, it's restitution. Her eyes were fierce now, determined. My company hurt you. Whether I knew about it or not, that's on me now. Let me try to make it right. You can't fix this with money or connections, Ms. Whitmore. My hand is ruined. That part of my life is over. Maybe. But Lily shouldn't have to watch her father clean toilets when he could be teaching someone else to make music, when he could be using what's left instead of hiding it. The words hit harder than Miles expected. He thought of Lily's face when she'd asked him to play, the wonder in her eyes, the way she'd said she missed hearing him. How long had it been since he'd let her see that part of him? How many years had he spent teaching her to accept less, to expect nothing, to build her world around his limitations? I'll think about it, he said finally, taking the card because refusing felt like admitting she was wrong. But I'm not making promises. I'm not asking for promises, just possibility. Vivian's expression softened slightly. And Miles? Thank you for finishing the song, for giving me something that beautiful even when you were grieving too. That wasn't nothing. That was everything. Miles left before the conversation could go deeper, before he could say something he'd regret or admit to feelings that had no place in the fluorescent-lit reality of his maintenance cart and his daughter's second-hand clothes. But as he rode the elevator down to the basement, Vivian Whitmore's business card burning in his pocket like a promise or a threat, he couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd looked at him, not like he was invisible, not like he was nobody, like he was someone who'd mattered once and maybe, terrifyingly, impossibly, could matter again. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine maintenance, each task mechanical and mindless. Miles unclogged drains, changed light bulbs, fixed a broken door handle on the third floor. He ate lunch in the basement break room, alone, Margaret mercifully absent. He picked up Lily from school at 3, listened to her chatter about Christmas wishes and her friend Emma's new puppy, and tried to be present in the moment instead of stuck in the past or terrified of the future. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Miles sat at their tiny kitchen table and stared at Vivian's business card, her personal number written in elegant script on the back, an invitation to possibility that felt more like a trap. His phone rang, an unknown number he almost didn't answer. Then something made him pick up. Mr. Carter? This is Dr. Richard Castellano. I understand you were a student of mine, briefly, about 13 years ago. Miles's world tilted. Dr. Castellano had been Evan's primary instructor at the conservatory, a renowned pianist and composer who'd taken Evan under his wing like a favored son. Miles had been in exactly 3 of his classes before dropping out, always sitting in the back, always invisible. Dr. Castellano, Yes, I remember you. Ms. Whitmore contacted me this afternoon. She asked me about a piece of music, specifically about whether Evan Hale had completed a certain composition before his death. The old man's voice was gentle, careful. I told her the truth, that Evan played me the opening movement and discussed his plans for the remainder, but that he died before writing another note. And then I told her about another student, a quiet one, who came to me 3 days after Evan's funeral with a completed score. Miles closed his eyes. You kept it. Of course I kept it. It was brilliant, Miles. Painful and raw and real in ways that Evan's opening, for all its technical perfection, wasn't. I've carried that score with me for 13 years, wondering what happened to the boy who wrote it. I'm not that person anymore. No one is the same person they were at 19, but the gift doesn't disappear just because the circumstances change. Ms. Whitmore told me about your injury, about your daughter, about the work you're doing now, and she asked me if I thought you could still teach, still contribute to music, even if you can't perform the way you once did. What did you tell her? I told her that some of the best teachers I've known were people who'd lost something. That loss gives perspective, empathy, understanding that pure talent never could. I told her that if you were willing, I'd be honored to recommend you for a position at the community music school where I volunteer. Nothing glamorous. Part-time, teaching kids who can't afford private lessons. But it's music, Miles. It's using what you have instead of mourning what you lost. Miles sat in the darkness of his kitchen, his ruined hand resting on the table, and felt something shift inside his chest. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too dangerous. But maybe the smallest crack in the armor he'd built around the possibility of being more than just a man who cleaned up other people's messes. "I have a daughter," he said finally. "She needs stability. I can't risk the job I have for something uncertain." Ms. Whitmore mentioned she'd be willing to arrange your maintenance schedule around teaching hours, and the position would come with a modest stipend, not enough to replace your income, but enough to supplement it. Dr. Castellano paused. "Miles, I'm not asking you to be who you were. I'm asking you to consider who you could still become." After he hung up, Miles sat for a long time in the quiet apartment, listening to the city beyond the windows, to Lily's soft breathing in the next room, to the voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like Vivian Whitmore saying, "You matter," like she meant it. He pulled out his phone, stared at the business card, and typed out a message before he could talk himself out of it. "Ms. Whitmore, this is Miles Carter. Dr. Castellano called. I'd like to discuss the teaching position. Thank you for remembering me." The response came back within 30 seconds. "My office, tomorrow, 8 a.m. And Miles, I never forgot you. I just didn't know where to look." Miles read the message 3 times, his heart doing complicated things in his chest, and wondered what he'd just set in motion. Wondered if Vivian Whitmore had any idea what it meant to be seen after years of invisibility, to be remembered after accepting that being forgotten was safer. Wondered if either of them was ready for what came next. In her penthouse apartment across the city, Vivian stood at the window with a glass of wine she hadn't touched, watching snow fall over the skyline. Graham had called twice, annoyed about something work-related that she couldn't bring herself to care about. Her father had sent his weekly reminder about quarterly projections and board meetings and maintaining the Whitmore reputation. She'd ignored them both. Instead, she'd spent the evening tracking down Dr. Castellano, pulling files from the conservatory, listening to the recording she'd made of Evan's opening movement on her phone, the only copy that existed, recorded on a summer afternoon when the world had still seemed full of endless possibility. And then she'd pulled up another recording, one she'd found in Dr. Castellano's archives. Miles Carter playing the complete piece, all 3 movements, recorded 2 weeks after Evan's funeral in an empty practice room when he'd thought no one was listening. Vivian had listened to it 4 times, tears streaming down her face, and heard everything she'd missed 13 years ago. The grief, the longing, the love that had never asked for anything in return. She'd heard herself in that music, had recognized the ache of losing Evan, yes, but also something deeper. The loneliness of being seen only as Vivian Reed, the girl Evan loved, instead of who she actually was. The exhaustion of pretending that losing him had broken her heart, instead of just confirming what she'd already suspected, that Evan's love had been more idea than reality, more poetry than presence. Miles's music had heard her, had understood her, had given her permission to grieve not just for Evan, but for all the versions of herself she'd had to bury to survive. And she'd forgotten him, had let him disappear into poverty and injury and a life so far beneath what he deserved that it made her physically ill to think about. Her phone buzzed with his message, and Vivian read it with a smile that felt strange on her face. Genuine, unguarded, dangerous. "I never forgot you," she'd written back, and it was truer than he could know. She just hadn't known she was remembering. Hadn't connected the quiet boy from the conservatory with the invisible maintenance worker who'd been moving through her building like a ghost for 3 years. Hadn't let herself see him, because seeing him would mean confronting everything she'd buried, the music, the grief, the person she'd been before she'd decided that building empires was safer than feeling things. But now she'd heard him play again. Had seen the way he looked at his daughter, with a love so fierce it made Vivian's carefully constructed defenses feel like paper. Had heard his voice crack when he'd said, "She's everything," like it was both confession and prayer. And Vivian Whitmore, Ice Queen CEO who prided herself on logic and control, felt something shift inside her chest. Something warm and terrifying and completely beyond her ability to manage. She thought about Graham, her fiancé, perfect on paper and hollow in reality. Thought about her father's approval, hard-won and never quite enough. Thought about the empire she'd built and the price she'd paid to maintain it. Then she thought about Miles Carter, standing in her office with his ruined hand and his quiet dignity, telling her she couldn't fix him with money or connections, while his eyes said he'd already accepted that being broken was the only option he had left. Vivian had built her fortune on seeing opportunities others missed, on understanding that the greatest value often lay in what had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed as worthless by people who only knew how to measure obvious things. Miles Carter was playing maintenance worker in her building while carrying genius in his scarred hands. That was unacceptable. That was wrong. And Vivian Whitmore had spent 13 years learning how to make wrong things right, even when everyone else said it was impossible. She lifted her wine glass to the snow-covered city and whispered a promise to the ghost of her younger self, the girl who'd loved music before she'd learned that love was just another liability. I see you now, Miles, and I'm not looking away again. The meeting the next morning lasted 15 minutes and changed everything. Vivian laid out the arrangement with the efficiency of someone who'd built an empire on decisive action. Miles would continue his maintenance position at reduced hours, supplemented by teaching at the community music school 3 afternoons a week. The combined income would actually exceed his current salary, and the flexible schedule meant he could pick Lily up from school himself instead of relying on Mrs. Chen's charity. "It's not a favor," Vivian said when Miles started to protest. "It's correcting an injustice. My company damaged your hand and paid you off instead of making things right. This is me making things right." Miles had signed the paperwork in a daze, his ruined hand shaking slightly as he wrote his name. When he looked up, Vivian was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something softer than the Ice Queen reputation suggested, something that made his chest tighten with dangerous possibility. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for seeing me, for remembering." "I should have seen you 13 years ago," Vivian replied, and there was regret in her voice, real and raw. "I should have paid attention to the quiet boy who understood grief better than anyone who was shouting about it." The words hung between them, full of everything they couldn't say in an office with glass walls and colleagues walking past. Then Margaret knocked on the door with some urgent facilities issue, and the moment shattered. Miles returned to his maintenance duties, but something had shifted in the building's atmosphere. People looked at him differently now, whispered when he passed. By lunch, the rumor mill was churning at full speed. The CEO had personally intervened on behalf of a maintenance worker, which meant either he was sleeping with her or blackmailing her, or had some secret connection that explained the preferential treatment. Miles ignored it all and focused on getting through the day, on picking up Lily, on starting his first teaching session at the community music school that afternoon with a handful of kids who couldn't afford proper instruments and looked at him with the same hungry hope he'd once carried. He thought he'd prepared himself for how it would feel to teach music again. He was wrong. The first time a 10-year-old girl with braids and missing front teeth played a scale correctly, her face lighting up with pure joy, Miles felt something crack open inside his chest. The part of himself he'd buried, the part that had loved music before it became loss and grief, and impossible dreams stirred like something waking from a long sleep. By the end of the week, he had 12 students. By the end of the month, 20. Word spread through the neighborhood that there was a teacher at the community center who understood what it meant to struggle, who knew how to work around limitations, who saw potential in kids that other instructors dismissed. Miles taught them the way Dr. Castellano had taught him, with patience and honesty and the understanding that music wasn't about perfection. It was about finding your voice and having the courage to let it be heard. Lily attended every session, doing homework in the corner, occasionally wandering over to watch her father demonstrate fingering on the scarred upright piano. She'd started asking questions about his past, about the conservatory, about why he'd stopped playing. Miles answered as honestly as he could, trying to find the balance between truth and the kind of truth a 7-year-old could carry. "You were really good, weren't you?" she asked one evening, her small hand resting on his damaged one. "Before you got hurt." "I was okay," Miles said carefully. "Good enough for a scholarship. Not good enough to be great." "But you finished the song. The one you played at the party. That was great, Daddy. Even I could tell." Miles pulled her close, resting his chin on her head. "Sometimes being great doesn't matter as much as being there for the people who need you. And you, Lily Carter, are the most important person in my world. Nothing I could have done with music would matter more than being your dad." She was quiet for a moment, then looked up at him with those two knowing eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore thinks you're great too. I can tell by the way she looks at you." "Mrs. Whitmore is my boss, baby. She's just being kind. No, Lily said with the absolute certainty of childhood. It's different, like how Emma's mom looks at Emma's dad when she thinks no one's watching, like she's trying to figure out a puzzle. Miles's heart did something complicated in his chest, but he forced himself to smile. You're imagining things. Except he wasn't sure she was. Because Vivian had started appearing at unexpected moments, stopping by the music school to drop off donated instruments, showing up in the facility's break room with coffee and questions about his teaching. She never stayed long, never crossed professional lines, but there was something in the way she looked at him now. Something that reminded him uncomfortably of how he'd looked at her 13 years ago, when loving her from a distance had felt safer than admitting he had no right to love her at all. Graham Pierce noticed too. Miles saw it in the way Vivian's fiancé had started watching him with cold calculation, the way Pierce's smile turned razor sharp whenever they crossed paths in the building. The confrontation came on a Friday evening, 3 weeks after Miles had started teaching. He was leaving the music school, Lily's hand in his, when a sleek black car pulled up beside them. The back window rolled down, revealing Graham Pierce in an expensive suit, his handsome face arranged in an expression of polite concern. Mr. Carter, a moment of your time? Miles instinctively moved Lily behind him. I'm taking my daughter home, Mr. Pierce. Of course. I'll give you both a ride. It's cold, and I'd hate for the child to catch ill. Pierce's smile didn't reach his eyes. I insist. There was no refusing without causing a scene, so Miles helped Lily into the warm interior of the town car and slid in beside her, every instinct screaming danger. Pierce waited until the car was moving before speaking. I've been doing some research on you, Mr. Carter. Fascinating background. Scholarship student at the conservatory briefly, dropped out after the Hale boy's death, then a series of menial jobs, an injury at one of our warehouses, a modest settlement, failed marriage, custody of a young child, and now suddenly, you're Vivian's personal project. Miles kept his voice level. Ms. Whitmore was kind enough to help me find additional work. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Are you? Pierce leaned back, studying Miles like something under glass. Or are you grateful for something else? Perhaps the attention of a woman who's been untouchable for 13 years, who's built walls around herself that no one has managed to breach. Until you. I don't know what you're implying. Don't insult my intelligence. Pierce's voice went hard. I've watched the way she looks at you, the way she's suddenly interested in music again after years of refusing to discuss her past. The way she's been distant with me since that Christmas party where you played that damn song. Lily pressed closer to Miles, and he wrapped his arm around her protectively. Mr. Pierce, you're making assumptions based on nothing. Miss Whitmore is engaged to you. Whatever you think you're seeing, I'm seeing a threat, Pierce interrupted. A nobody from her past who somehow wormed his way back into her life by playing on old sentiments. And I'm telling you now, Mr. Carter, that I won't allow it. Vivian is mine. The merger of our families, our companies, our futures, it's been planned for years. I'm not letting some maintenance worker with a sob story destroy what I've built. The car pulled up outside Miles's apartment building, and he didn't waste time on responses. He simply gathered Lily and got out, meeting Pierce's eyes through the open door. Vivian Whitmore isn't property, Mr. Pierce. She's not yours or anyone else's. And whatever you think I want from her, you're wrong. I want my daughter to have a decent life, that's all. He closed the door and walked away, Lily's hand tight in his, feeling Pierce's eyes on his back like a target. That night, after Lily was asleep, Miles sat at the kitchen table and tried to convince himself that Pierce was wrong. That Vivian's kindness was just guilt over the warehouse accident, nothing more. That the way she'd looked at him in her office had been professional concern, not the kind of recognition that made his heart race and his carefully constructed defenses crumble. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Graham Pierce, stay away from Vivian or I'll make sure you lose everything. Your job, your teaching position, custody of your daughter. I have the resources and connections to destroy you. Don't test me. Miles stared at the message, his blood running cold. The threat about Lily was clear. Pierce had done enough research to know exactly where to apply pressure, and Miles had seen enough of the world to know that men like Graham Pierce didn't make empty threats. He deleted the message and turned off his phone, but sleep didn't come easily. The situation came to a head the following week in the worst possible way. Miles was teaching his afternoon session when Margaret appeared in the doorway of the community center, her expression grim. "Mr. Carter, I need you to come with me. Now." "I'm in the middle of class." "Now, Mr. Carter, it's urgent." Something in her tone made his stomach drop. He asked one of the other volunteers to take over, grabbed Lily, and followed Margaret out to her car. She drove in tense silence back to Whitmore Holdings, pulling into the underground garage and leading them to a conference room Miles had never seen before. Inside, Vivian sat at the head of a long table, her face pale and tight with controlled fury. Across from her sat Graham Pierce, looking smug, and at the other end of the table, a man Miles recognized with sinking dread, Gordon Whitmore, Vivian's father, the patriarch who'd built the empire his daughter now ran. Gordon was in his mid-60s, silver-haired and commanding, with the kind of presence that made rooms feel smaller. He looked at Miles the way someone might look at mud tracked across expensive carpet. "Mr. Carter," Gordon said, his voice like gravel, "sit down. We have much to discuss." Miles glanced at Vivian, who gave the smallest shake of her head, a warning he didn't understand. He sat anyway, pulling Lily onto his lap because he couldn't bear to let her go. "Graham has brought some concerning information to my attention," Gordon continued, sliding a folder across the table. "Information about your past, your injury at one of our facilities, the settlement we paid, and more recently, your sudden proximity to my daughter." Miles opened the folder with his good hand and felt the world tilt. Inside were photographs. Him entering Vivian's office, Vivian visiting the music school, the two of them talking in the facility's break room. Innocent moments, but framed through Pierce's lens, they looked intimate, suspicious. "I can explain. Can you explain this?" Gordon pulled out another document, a copy of the song, the complete three-movement piece, with both Evan's name and Miles's written at the top. "Graham's investigators found this in Dr. Castellano's archives. You claim to have written music originally attributed to Evan Hale. You inserted yourself into my daughter's past, then manipulated your way into her present. I'd call that fraud, Mr. Carter. At best." "It's not fraud," Vivian said sharply. "Miles did write those movements. Dr. Castellano confirmed it. And I asked him to take the teaching position. There was no manipulation." "Really?" Gordon's expression was skeptical. "Because it looks to me like a man with nothing saw an opportunity to exploit a lonely woman's nostalgia. Play the right song, tell the right story, and suddenly you have access to opportunities far beyond your station." "That's not what happened, isn't it?" Pierce leaned forward, his eyes cold. "You knew who Vivian was when you started working here. You knew about her connection to Evan Hale, and you waited 3 years to reveal yourself until you could time it for maximum emotional impact." "I didn't reveal myself," Miles shot back. "Lily asked me to play, and I played. I didn't know Vivian would hear it. I didn't know she'd even remember the song." "How convenient," Gordon's voice dripped with sarcasm. "And now you're here, teaching music to children, getting close to my daughter, positioning yourself as some kind of misunderstood genius. Tell me, Mr. Carter, what exactly do you want? Money? A better position? A lawsuit claiming we ruined your career?" Miles felt Lily trembling against him and forced himself to stay calm. "I want to take care of my daughter. That's all I've ever wanted." "Then take this." Graham pushed another folder across the table. Inside is a check for $200,000. More than enough to relocate somewhere else, start over, give your daughter a comfortable life. All you have to do is resign from both positions, sign an NDA, and disappear. Again. The room went silent. Miles stared at the folder, his heart pounding, and felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. "Don't you dare," Vivian said quietly, and Miles looked up to find her gray eyes blazing with something fierce and protective. "Don't you dare take that money, Miles. Don't let them buy you off like you're nothing." "Vivian, be reasonable," Gordon said. "This man is clearly after something." "He's after nothing." She stood, her voice sharp enough to cut. "For 3 years, Miles worked in this building without saying a word about his past, about the injury we caused, about the music he gave me when I needed it most. If he wanted money or revenge or anything else, he had countless opportunities. But he stayed quiet. He stayed invisible, because that's what he's been taught to do. Accept that he doesn't matter, that people like him should be grateful for scraps, while people like us destroy them and call it business. You're being emotional. I'm being honest. Vivian moved to stand beside Miles's chair, and he could feel the tension radiating from her. Miles completed Evan's song 13 years ago and let Evan take all the credit because he thought he was nobody. He worked in our warehouse and lost the use of his hand because we prioritize profit over safety. He's been raising his daughter alone while working maintenance in the building where he should have been valued for his talent. And now you're trying to pay him off again, to make him disappear again, because acknowledging what we did to him would be inconvenient. What we did? Gordon's face darkened. Vivian, you're the CEO. You need to think about liability, about precedent. I'm thinking about what's right. Her hands were shaking now, and Miles realized with shock that this was costing her something, that standing up to her father, her fiancé, everything she'd built her life around, was tearing her apart even as she did it. I'm thinking about a man who gave me music when I was drowning in grief, who's been teaching children for pennies because he still believes in something beautiful even after everything we took from him. And I'm thinking that if we can't acknowledge what we owe him, if we can't make real amends instead of just throwing money and silence at the problem, then everything I've built here is worthless. Graham stood, his composure finally cracking. You're ruining your reputation over a maintenance worker, over someone who can't possibly understand the world you live in, the responsibilities you carry. Vivian, I'm asking you to be smart about this. Don't throw away our future for some sentimental fantasy about your past. Our future? Vivian turned to face him, and Miles saw something break open in her expression. We don't have a future, Graham. We have an arrangement, a merger, a carefully calculated partnership that looks perfect on paper and feels empty everywhere else. That's not fair. It's honest, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. She pulled off the engagement ring on her left hand and set it on the table between them. I'm sorry, Graham. You deserve someone who loves you the way you should be loved. But that person isn't me. It never was. The room erupted in chaos. Gordon shouting about scandals and board meetings, Graham's face cycling through shock and fury, Margaret standing frozen in the doorway like she'd witnessed a train wreck. And through it all, Vivian stood there with her shoulders back and her head high, looking like she'd just shed a weight that had been crushing her for years. Miles sat holding Lily, watching his carefully constructed life implode, and couldn't find the words to stop it. Couldn't find the words to tell Vivian that she was making a mistake, that he wasn't worth this kind of sacrifice, that people like him didn't get happy endings no matter how many ice queens decided to burn their empires down. Finally, Gordon stood, his face thunderous. If you do this, Vivian, if you end this engagement over some nobody from your past, the board will have questions. Your judgment will be questioned. Everything you've built could come crashing down. Then let it crash. Vivian's voice was steady now, certain. I'd rather lose everything I've built on lies than keep pretending that success without integrity means anything at all. Gordon stared at his daughter like she'd become a stranger, then grabbed his coat and walked out, Graham trailing behind him. Margaret followed, leaving Miles and Vivian alone with Lily in the sudden ringing silence. Vivian sank into a chair, her hands shaking, her composure finally cracking. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to witness that. I'm sorry Lily had to witness that. Miles set Lily down gently, crouched in front of Vivian's chair. You didn't have to do that, any of it. I would have taken the money and disappeared. I would have protected you from this. I know you would have. She looked at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. That's exactly why I couldn't let you, because you've spent your whole life protecting everyone else, accepting less, making yourself smaller so other people could feel bigger. And I've spent 13 years building walls so high I forgot what it felt like to actually want something for myself instead of just wanting to prove I deserved my own name. Vivian, I heard you, Miles. 13 years ago, after Evan died, I sat in my dorm room and listened to someone play that completed song in an empty practice room. I didn't know it was you. I didn't know you'd finished what Evan started. But I heard the pain in that music, the longing, the love that knew it couldn't be returned. And it saved me. It gave me permission to grieve not just for Evan, but for everything I'd lost, for the person I'd been before I decided that feeling things was too dangerous. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they touched his face. When I saw you that night at the Christmas party, When I heard you play again, it wasn't nostalgia. It was recognition. It was realizing that the person who'd understood me better than anyone, who'd given me the music that got me through the darkest time of my life, had been invisible in my own building for 3 years. And I can't let that stand. I can't let you keep being invisible. Not anymore. Miles caught her hand, held it against his cheek, and felt 13 years of carefully maintained distance collapse into nothing. I'm not asking you to burn your life down for me. I'm not asking for anything. I know. That's what makes you different. Vivian's smile was watery, fragile, real. Everyone else in my life wants something. Power, money, connections, validation. But you just want to take care of your daughter and teach kids to make music, and somehow that's more than I knew how to ask for. Lily, who'd been watching the adults with wide eyes, spoke up from where she sat on the floor. Does this mean you and Daddy can be friends now? Real friends? Not just boss and worker friends? Vivian laughed, the sound breaking on a sob, and Miles felt something shift in his chest. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Yeah, Lily, Vivian said softly. I think it does. But as they sat there in the empty conference room, Miles couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. That Graham Pierce wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. That Gordon Whitmore would fight to protect his daughter's reputation, even if it meant destroying the man she'd chosen to defend. That the storm they'd just survived was only a preview of what was coming. He looked at Vivian, at the woman who'd just ended her engagement, and challenged her father because she believed Miles mattered, and felt the weight of that belief settle over him like armor or chains. Either way, there was no going back now. The fallout began within hours. Miles took Lily home, made her dinner, and tried to act like nothing had changed while his phone buzzed incessantly with messages he was afraid to read. He bathed her, read her a story about a brave princess who chose her own destiny, and tucked her into bed with shaking hands. Daddy? Lily's voice was small in the darkness. Is Mrs. Whitmore going to be okay? She looked really sad when we left. She's going to be fine, baby. She's one of the strongest people I've ever met. But she was crying. Strong people cry too, right? Miles sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her dark curls. Yeah, Lil, strong people cry too. Sometimes crying is the bravest thing you can do. After she fell asleep, he finally looked at his phone. 3 missed calls from Margaret, 2 from Dr. Castellano, 1 from a number he didn't recognize, and a single text from Vivian sent 20 minutes ago. Graham is planning something. My father is furious. The board has called an emergency meeting for Monday morning. I'm not sorry for what I did, but I need you to be careful. These are powerful men who don't like being challenged. Miles typed back slowly with his good hand. Are you okay? The response came immediately. No, but I'm better than I've been in years. Thank you for being worth it. He stared at those last 4 words until they blurred, then set the phone down and tried to breathe through the tightness in his chest. Worth it. When had anyone ever called him worth anything? The weekend passed in tense quiet. Miles took Lily to the park, to the library, anywhere that felt normal and safe. He avoided the news, avoided social media, avoided anything that might show him the scandal Vivian had created by ending her engagement to one of the city's most eligible bachelors. But Monday came anyway, relentless and inevitable. Miles dropped Lily at school and headed to Whitmore Holdings with dread pooling in his stomach. The lobby felt different, hostile eyes tracking his movement, whispers following in his wake. He kept his head down, pushed his maintenance cart toward the service elevator, and tried to become invisible again. Margaret intercepted him before he reached safety. Mr. Carter, Ms. Whitmore wants you in the executive boardroom, 9th floor. Now. I'm not dressed for... Now, Mr. Carter. The boardroom was all dark wood and leather chairs, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 12 board members sat around the massive table, their faces ranging from curious to openly hostile. At the head sat Gordon Whitmore, his expression carved from stone. Vivian sat to his right, her black suit armor against the scrutiny, her face carefully neutral. And across from her, looking like he'd just won something, sat Graham Pierce. Mr. Carter. Gordon's voice cut through the room like a blade. Thank you for joining us. Please sit. Miles sat in the chair someone pulled out for him, hyper-aware of his gray maintenance uniform among the sea of expensive suits. He found Vivian's eyes across the table, and she gave the smallest nod. Trust me, it seemed to say. The board has convened this morning, Gordon continued, to discuss recent events that have raised questions about judgment, propriety, and potential liability. Specifically, my daughter's decision to end her engagement to Mr. Pierce and her subsequent involvement with an employee. There's no involvement, Vivian said calmly. I corrected an injustice. I helped an employee access opportunities he'd earned, and I ended a relationship that wasn't serving either party. None of that violates company policy or professional ethics. Doesn't it? One of the board members, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Chen, leaned forward. You personally arranged for Mr. Carter to receive a teaching position. You've been seen meeting with him privately on multiple occasions, and you ended your engagement immediately after these interactions began. The optics, Vivian, are problematic at best. The optics or the truth? Vivian's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Because the truth is that Whitmore Holdings injured Mr. Carter in one of our facilities 6 years ago. We paid him a settlement designed to silence him rather than actually compensate for ending his career. And when I discovered this, I chose to do what was right instead of what was convenient. By giving him preferential treatment, another board member, Marcus Webb, shook his head. Vivian, we have protocols for a reason. You can't just what? Acknowledge that we value productivity over people? That will crush someone's dreams and pay them off rather than implement real safety changes? Vivian stood, and Miles watched her transform into something fierce and unbreakable. Miles Carter was a scholarship student at the conservatory. He had talent and potential and a future. We took that from him with faulty equipment and inadequate oversight. And instead of making it right, we made it disappear. Just like we've made countless other problems disappear over the years. This is about more than one injured employee, Gordon interrupted. This is about your judgment, your priorities. Graham has brought to our attention some concerning information about Mr. Carter's past relationship with Evan Hale and the questionable circumstances around a musical composition. There's nothing questionable about it. Dr. Castellano's voice rang out from the doorway, and Miles turned to see his old instructor entering the boardroom like he owned it. The elderly man moved to stand beside Vivian, his weathered face stern. I was Evan Hale's primary instructor. I heard the opening movement of the piece in question when Evan was alive, and I heard the completed composition from Miles Carter 2 weeks after Evan's funeral. There was no fraud, no manipulation, just a grieving young man who finished his friend's work and gave him the credit because he thought he didn't deserve recognition. Dr. Castellano, Graham said smoothly. With all respect, your testimony doesn't address the larger issue. Mr. Carter knew about his connection to Ms. Whitmore's past. He took a job in this building and said nothing for 3 years. That suggests calculation, not coincidence. It suggests poverty, Miles said quietly, and every eye turned to him. It suggests desperation. I had a daughter to feed and medical bills I couldn't pay. When I saw Whitmore Holdings was hiring, I applied because I needed work, not because I wanted to insert myself into anyone's life. I didn't even know Vivian worked here until my 2nd week, and by then I'd already decided that staying invisible was safer than reminding her I existed. Why? Patricia Chen asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. If you'd completed this famous composition, if you had this connection to the CEO, why not use it? Miles looked at his ruined hand, then at Vivian, then back to the board members judging him from their leather thrones. Because I learned a long time ago that people like me don't matter to people like you. We're interchangeable parts in your machine, and when we break, you replace us and forget we existed. I didn't want Vivian to remember me because I knew what she'd see. A nobody who used to play piano and now unclogs toilets. I wanted to spare both of us that humiliation. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Finally, Gordon spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. This is exactly the problem. You've made yourself into a victim, Mr. Carter. And my daughter has bought into your narrative. But I've done my research too. You dropped out of the conservatory. You took a series of manual labor jobs despite your supposed talent. You got injured because you ignored safety protocols. That's a lie. Vivian's voice cracked like a whip. The safety protocols at that warehouse were non-existent. We paid the fine and settled because we knew we were liable. Don't rewrite history to make Miles responsible for our negligence. Nevertheless, Gordon continued, The fact remains that you've allowed personal feelings to compromise your professional judgment. The board has a responsibility to the company, to our shareholders, to the Whitmore name, and we cannot allow that name to be damaged by scandal." "What scandal?" Vivian demanded. "A CEO treating an employee with basic human decency? Acknowledging past wrongs and trying to correct them? Or is the scandal that I refused to marry a man I didn't love for the sake of a merger that benefits everyone in this room except me?" Graham finally stood, his handsome face arranged in an expression of wounded dignity that would have been convincing if Miles hadn't seen the calculation behind it. "I didn't want to do this, Vivian. I hoped you'd come to your senses, but you've left me no choice." He nodded to one of his assistants, who distributed folders around the table. Miles watched the board members open them, watched their expressions shift from curiosity to concern to something that looked like disgust. "What is this?" Vivian demanded, snatching one of the folders. "Documentation," Graham said smoothly, "of Mr. Carter's history, his failed marriage, his custody arrangement, the fact that he's raising his daughter in a rundown apartment in one of the city's worst neighborhoods, the fact that he's been supplementing his income by taking on under-the-table repairs for cash, and most importantly, the fact that he's been allowing his 7-year-old daughter to spend time in potentially dangerous situations, like bringing her to the Christmas party where she was injured, or having her present during teaching sessions where he's alone with other people's children." Miles felt his blood run cold. "I would never. You brought an unsupervised child to a corporate event where she fell and was injured. You're now teaching classes where you have access to vulnerable children with your own daughter present as a distraction. And according to CPS guidelines, your living situation is borderline negligent." Graham's smile was pure poison. "I've taken the liberty of filing a formal complaint with Child Protective Services. They'll be investigating your fitness as a parent. For Lily's own safety, of course." The world tilted sideways. Miles gripped the edge of the table, his vision tunneling, his breath coming in short gasps. "You can't. She's everything." "I can, and I did." Graham turned to the board, his voice reasonable and concerned. "I think we can all agree that this situation has gotten out of hand. Ms. Whitmore's judgment has been compromised by sentimental attachment to a man who may not be the person she believes him to be. For the sake of the company, for her own protection, and for the welfare of an innocent child, I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in Vivian Whitmore's leadership." The room erupted. Board members shouting over each other, Gordon pounding the table for order, Vivian's voice rising above the chaos, demanding that everyone calm down and think rationally. But Miles couldn't hear any of it over the roaring in his ears. They were going to take Lily. Graham had found the one weapon guaranteed to destroy him, and he was wielding it with surgical precision. It didn't matter that the accusations were exaggerated or taken out of context. CPS investigations were nightmares to navigate even when you had money and connections. For someone like Miles, poor, alone, already damaged in the eyes of the system, it could mean losing his daughter while they sorted through paperwork and bureaucracy. He stood on shaking legs, interrupting the chaos. "Stop. Please, just stop." Vivian turned to him, her face pale. "Miles, don't—" "I'll resign," he said, his voice hollow. "From both positions. I'll sign whatever NDAs you want, take whatever settlement you're offering, and disappear. Just call off the CPS investigation. Please. Lily needs me. She's all I have." "No." Vivian moved to his side, her hand finding his. "You're not giving them what they want. We'll fight this. I'll get you the best lawyers." "With what standing?" Graham interrupted. "You're not his wife, Vivian. You're not even his girlfriend. You're his employer who's shown questionable judgment. If anything, your involvement makes the situation worse for him." Miles looked at Vivian and saw his own desperation reflected in her gray eyes. She wanted to fight, wanted to use her power and resources to protect him. But Graham was right. Her involvement would only make things worse, would give CPS more reason to question the stability of his home life. "I'm sorry," he whispered, squeezing her hand once before pulling away. "I'm so sorry. But I can't lose her. I can't." He turned to Graham, forcing the words past the lump in his throat. "I'll do whatever you want. Just leave my daughter alone." Graham's smile was triumphant. "Smart choice. I'll have the papers drawn up this afternoon. You'll resign effective immediately, relocate out of state within 30 days, and sign an agreement never to contact Vivian or discuss your time at Whitmore Holdings. In exchange, the CPS complaint will be withdrawn, and you'll receive a settlement of $500,000, enough to start over somewhere else. $500,000. More money than Miles had ever imagined having. Enough to give Lily everything he'd never been able to provide. A good school, a safe neighborhood, a future without the shadow of poverty. All he had to do was walk away from Vivian, from the music, from the first time in years he'd felt like something more than just a collection of failures. He looked at her one more time, memorizing the way her dark hair caught the light, the set of her shoulders, the fury and heartbreak warring in her expression. "I'm sorry," he said again. "Thank you for seeing me, for remembering. It meant everything." Then he walked out of the boardroom before she could stop him, before he could change his mind, before he could put his own desperate hope above his daughter's safety. The lobby was chaos when he reached it, reporters and photographers crowding the entrance, news of the boardroom drama having leaked with suspicious speed. Miles slipped out a service exit, retrieved Lily from school, and took her home to pack. She cried when he told her they were moving, didn't understand why they had to leave her friends and her school and the music lessons she'd just started to love. Miles held her while she sobbed, his own tears silent and bitter, and tried to explain that sometimes loving someone meant letting them go. That night, after Lily finally cried herself to sleep, Miles sat at their tiny kitchen table and stared at the business card Vivian had given him weeks ago. Her personal number, still written in elegant script on the back. He should throw it away. Should start packing, start planning their move to somewhere far from the wreckage of everything that might have been. Instead, he picked up his phone and typed out a message. "I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to stay. I'm sorry I let them win. But thank you for making me feel like I mattered, even if it was just for a little while. Take care of yourself, Vivian. You deserve someone who can stand beside you without bringing everything crashing down." He hit send before he could reconsider, then turned off his phone and went to bed, knowing sleep wouldn't come. Across the city, Vivian stood in her penthouse apartment staring at the message, her heart splintering into pieces sharp enough to draw blood. Around her, the empire she'd built felt like a cage, all glass and steel and cold luxury that meant nothing without someone to share it with. She'd spent the afternoon in emergency meetings with lawyers, trying to find some way to stop Graham's machinations, to protect Miles without making things worse. But every path led to the same conclusion. She had power, but only within the system. And Graham had weaponized that system against the one person who'd reminded her what it felt like to want something real. Her father had been coldly furious, informing her that the board was seriously considering Graham's vote of no confidence, that her decision to end the engagement had raised questions about her stability, her priorities, her fitness to lead. "You threw away everything for a maintenance worker," Gordon had said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "for someone who can't possibly understand the sacrifices leadership requires. I raised you better than this, Vivian." She'd wanted to scream at him that he'd raised her to value profit over people, success over integrity, the Whitmore name over everything human and real. That Miles understood sacrifice better than anyone in that boardroom, because he'd been sacrificing his whole life while they'd been building empires on the backs of people they'd never see. But she'd stayed silent because fighting her father wouldn't save Miles, wouldn't stop the CPS investigation or prevent Graham from destroying him. So she'd let them think they'd won. Now, standing alone in her penthouse with Miles's message burning on her phone screen, Vivian made a decision. She'd spent 13 years building walls, becoming untouchable, proving she was strong enough to lead the empire her father had built. And in the process, she'd forgotten the girl who'd loved music, who'd grieved for a boy who'd written her songs, who'd been saved by a quiet pianist who'd understood her pain better than anyone who'd tried to fix it. Miles thought he was nobody, thought he didn't deserve to be remembered, to be fought for, to be protected. He was wrong, and Vivian Whitmore hadn't become one of the most powerful CEOs in the country by accepting defeat quietly. She picked up her phone and made 3 calls. The first was to Dr. Castellano. "I need you to find every piece of evidence you have about Miles's talent, his character, his dedication to his students. Letters of recommendation, teaching evaluations, anything that proves he's not just a good teacher, but an exceptional one." The second was to her personal lawyer. I need you to file a counter-complaint against Graham Pierce for harassment and intimidation, and I need you to find the best family law attorney in the state. Someone who can make a CPS investigation disappear before it destroys an innocent man. The third call was to a private investigator she'd used for corporate due diligence. I need everything you can find on Graham Pierce. Every skeleton, every shady deal, every piece of leverage I can use to make him back down. And I need it by morning. Then she sat down at her laptop and started writing. Not a business proposal or a board memo, but something far more dangerous. The truth. She wrote about the warehouse accident, about the settlement designed to silence rather than compensate. She wrote about Miles's talent, his character, the way he'd completed a Dead Boys song and given him all the credit because he thought he didn't deserve recognition. She wrote about Graham's threats, her father's complicity, the system that allowed powerful men to destroy anyone who threatened their control. And she wrote about her own complicity, about the years she'd spent building an empire while ignoring the people crushed beneath it, about the engagement she'd accepted because it looked good on paper while feeling empty in every way that mattered, about the walls she'd built that had kept her safe and alone, and slowly dying inside. By dawn, she had a manifesto, a confession, a declaration of war against everything the Whitmore empire had become. She posted it on the company blog, sent it to every major news outlet, and copied the entire board of directors. Then she got dressed in her best armor, a black suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and headed to Whitmore Holdings to face whatever came next. The building was under siege when she arrived, reporters and cameras everywhere, the scandal she'd created burning through social media like wildfire. Miles's story was trending, the photo of his ruined hand next to images of the warehouse where he'd been injured drawing outrage from labor advocates and social justice warriors alike. Margaret met her in the lobby, her expression caught between horror and grudging respect. "The board is demanding your immediate resignation. Your father is threatening to have you removed by force if necessary. And Mr. Pierce has called a press conference for this afternoon." "Good," Vivian said calmly. "Let them come." She rode the elevator to her office and found the entire board assembled, their faces ranging from furious to fearful. Gordon stood at the head, his expression thunderous. "What have you done?" he demanded. "You've made us into villains, exposed confidential settlements, destroyed shareholder confidence." "I told the truth," Vivian interrupted, "something this company stopped doing a long time ago." "You've committed career suicide," Patricia Chen said, though there was something like admiration in her voice. "The SEC will investigate. Shareholders will sue. We'll be lucky to survive the month." "Then we rebuild." Vivian met each board member's eyes in turn. "We rebuild as a company that values people over profit, that implements real safety protocols instead of settling lawsuits, that doesn't destroy talented individuals and call it acceptable loss." "This is about more than business ethics," Graham snarled, and Vivian noticed he looked less composed than usual, his perfect hair slightly disheveled. "This is about you throwing a tantrum because you couldn't have your pet project without consequences." "No, Graham. This is about me refusing to let you weaponize a child to maintain your control." She pulled out her phone, opened an email, and projected it onto the conference room screen. "This is the counter-complaint my lawyers filed this morning. Harassment, intimidation, abuse of corporate resources for personal vendetta. And this," she opened another file, "is the documentation my investigators found about your creative accounting in the acquisitions department. Nothing illegal technically, but ethically questionable enough that the board might have questions about your judgment." Graham's face went white, then red. "You're bluffing." "Try me." Vivian's voice could have frozen oceans. "I'll burn this entire empire to the ground before I let you destroy an innocent man and his daughter. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw the CPS complaint, you're going to resign from Whitmore Holdings, and you're going to disappear from our lives. In exchange, I won't release the full audit to the SEC or the press." "The board will never allow..." "The board," Vivian said calmly, "is going to vote right now. Anyone who wants to maintain the status quo, who thinks protecting our reputation is more important than doing what's right, can vote to remove me. I'll go quietly. But know that if you do, the full story comes out anyway. Every settlement, every cover-up, every time we chose profit over people. I'll make sure of it. The silence was deafening. Finally, Patricia Chen spoke. I vote to accept Mr. Pierce's resignation and support Vivian's proposed reforms. One by one, the other board members followed. Even Gordon, his face carved from stone, finally nodded. For the good of the company. Graham stared at them all like they'd betrayed him, then grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, his parting words a snarl of fury. You'll regret this, Vivian. All of you will. The door slammed behind him, and Vivian felt something in her chest unclench. Now she just had to find Miles and convince him that fighting was worth it, that he was worth it, that they both deserved a chance at something real, even if it meant burning down everything they'd built to make room for it. Miles was halfway through packing when someone knocked on his apartment door. He'd spent the morning sorting through 3 years of accumulated life. Lily's outgrown clothes, cheap furniture he'd found on street corners, the handful of music books he'd kept hidden in the back of his closet like contraband. Every item felt heavy with failure, with the knowledge that he was running again, choosing safety over dignity, survival over truth. Lily sat on the floor surrounded by her stuffed animals, trying to decide which ones could come and which ones had to stay. She'd stopped crying an hour ago, but her eyes were still red-rimmed, her small face set in an expression of resignation that no 7-year-old should have to wear. The knock came again, more insistent. Miles opened the door, expecting Mrs. Chen or maybe a process server with the settlement papers Graham had promised. Instead, Vivian Whitmore stood in his doorway wearing a black suit and an expression of fierce determination that made his heart stop. You can't be here, he said immediately, glancing past her to see if anyone had followed. If someone sees you, I don't care who sees me. She pushed past him into the apartment, her eyes scanning the half-packed boxes, the dismantled life, and something in her expression cracked. Miles, you can't do this. You can't let them win. I'm not letting them win. I'm protecting my daughter. He closed the door, keeping his voice low so Lily wouldn't hear from her bedroom. Graham filed a CPS complaint. Do you know what that means? Even if it's baseless, even if I did nothing wrong, they can take her while they investigate. They can put her in foster care while they sort through paperwork and interviews and home visits. I can't risk that. I won't. You don't have to. Vivian pulled out her phone, showed him an email. Graham withdrew the complaint this morning. It's over. You're not under investigation. Miles stared at the screen, his hand shaking. How? I gave him a choice. Withdraw the complaint and resign, or I release evidence of his creative accounting practices to the SEC. He chose self-preservation over vengeance. Her smile was sharp and joyless. Turns out even Graham Pierce has limits to how far he'll go when his own career is on the line. The relief was so intense it made Miles's knees weak. He sat down hard on the sagging couch, his head in his hands, breathing through the wave of emotion threatening to drown him. Lily's safe? Lily's safe. The complaint is withdrawn, expunged from the record. No one is taking her from you. Miles looked up at her, this woman who'd burned down her own empire to protect him, and felt something break open in his chest. Why would you do that? Risk everything, fight Graham, expose your company's secrets. Why? Vivian sat beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, feel the warmth of her presence. Because you were right, about everything. We did crush you with our machinery and our indifference. We did pay you off to make you disappear. And I spent 13 years building an empire on that same foundation, prioritizing profit over people, success over integrity, the Whitmore name over everything human and real. You reminded me who I used to be before I forgot that power without conscience is just another form of cruelty. I didn't mean to. I know you didn't. That's what makes you different. She reached out, her fingers finding his damaged hand, tracing the scars with careful gentleness. Everyone else in my life wants something from me. Power, money, connections, access. But you just wanted to take care of your daughter and teach kids to make music. You asked for nothing, and somehow that was everything I'd forgotten to ask for myself. Vivian. Her name came out rough, broken. I'm still nobody. I'm still the guy who cleans toilets and lives in a rundown apartment and can barely keep his daughter fed. You ending your engagement, fighting your father, exposing your company, none of that changes who I am or where I come from. You're wrong. She shifted closer, her gray eyes fierce with conviction. You're the person who completed a dead boy's song and gave him all the credit because you thought he deserved to be remembered. You're the person who lost the use of your hand and instead of becoming bitter, you learned to teach others to find their voice. You're the person who's been raising your daughter alone with nothing but love and determination and the kind of quiet strength that doesn't need recognition to exist. That's not nobody, Miles. That's the definition of someone worth fighting for. Miles wanted to believe her, wanted to let himself hope that maybe, impossibly, someone like her could see value in someone like him. But years of being invisible, of accepting less, of learning that people like him didn't get happy endings, made the hope feel dangerous. What about your company, your reputation, your father? The company will survive. We're implementing real reforms, genuine safety protocols, accountability for past wrongs. It won't be easy, and we'll probably lose money in the short term, but we'll be better for it. She smiled slightly, though it didn't reach her eyes. As for my reputation, it's taking a beating in the business press, but I'm getting messages from labor groups, disability advocates, people who've been crushed by corporate indifference and never had anyone with power acknowledge it. Maybe that's worth more than being untouchable. And your father? Furious, disappointed, threatening to restructure my authority on the board. Her voice was steady, but Miles could hear the pain beneath. But he voted to support the reforms, voted to accept Graham's resignation. He may not understand my choices, but he's not actively working against them. That's something. You gave up so much, Miles whispered. For me, for someone you barely remember from 13 years ago. I remember you better than you think. Vivian's hand tightened on his. I remember the quiet boy who sat in the back of theory classes and never raised his hand even though he always knew the answers. I remember how you played Chopin like you were having a conversation with ghosts. I remember the way you looked at me sometimes when you thought no one was watching, like I was something precious and unreachable. And I remember thinking just once or twice that maybe the person who saw me most clearly wasn't the golden boy everyone expected me to love, but the shadow who never asked for anything. Miles's throat had gone tight. I loved you back then. I loved you so much it hurt. And I knew you'd never look at me the way you looked at Evan. So I stayed quiet, stayed invisible, finished the song for you because giving you something beautiful was the only way I could love you without asking you to love me back. Oh, Miles. Her voice broke on his name, and when he looked at her, there were tears streaming down her face. I did look at you. Not often enough, not clearly enough, but I saw you. And when Evan died, when I was drowning in grief and guilt because I didn't love him the way he deserved, it was your music that saved me. The movements you wrote. They understood what I was feeling better than I understood it myself. They gave me permission to mourn not just Evan, but all the versions of myself I had to bury to survive. I didn't know, Miles said softly. I thought the music died with everything else. It didn't die. It just waited. She lifted his damaged hand to her lips, kissed the scars gently. 13 years it waited. And now you're here, and I'm here, and maybe we get a second chance at something that should have been possible the first time if we'd both been braver. Before Miles could respond, Lily appeared in the doorway, her dark eyes wide. Daddy? Are we still leaving? Miles looked at his daughter, then at Vivian, then at the half-pack boxes that represented his willingness to run rather than fight. He thought about teaching her to accept less, to expect nothing, to make herself smaller so other people could feel bigger. Thought about what kind of lesson that was for a 7-year-old girl who deserved to see her father stand up for himself, fight for something real, choose courage over fear. No, Lil, he said, his voice steady for the first time in days. We're not leaving. We're staying right here. Lily's face lit up like sunrise, and she ran to throw her arms around his neck. Really? We can stay? I can keep my school and my friends and my music lessons? Really, I promise. He held her tight, breathing in her strawberry shampoo, and felt Vivian's hand warm on his shoulder. Good, Lily said, pulling back to look at Vivian with the serious expression she wore when making important decisions. Because Mrs. Whitmore is nice, and she makes you smile, Daddy. You don't smile enough. Miles laughed, the sound breaking on something that might have been a sob. You're right, baby. I don't smile enough. Then you should smile more. And Mrs. Whitmore should help you because she's good at making people feel better. Lily looked between them with the uncanny wisdom of children who see things adults work hard to hide. Are you going to be my daddy's girlfriend now? Vivian's laugh was startled and genuine, the Ice Queen facade cracking to reveal something warm and real underneath. I don't know, Lily. Would that be okay with you? Lily considered this gravely. Only if you promise not to make him sad. He's been sad for a really long time, even when he pretends he's not. I promise, Vivian said softly, and Miles heard the weight of that promise, the commitment it carried. I promise to try my very best to make him happy instead. Okay then, Lily nodded, satisfied. I'm going to unpack my stuffed animals now. They were sad about moving too. She skipped back to her room, leaving Miles and Vivian alone in the sudden quiet. So, Vivian said, her voice careful, uncertain in a way he'd never heard from her. Your daughter has given her blessing. The question is whether you want this. Want me. I know I'm complicated and damaged and come with more baggage than any sane person should take on. Miles kissed her. It was clumsy and desperate and 13 years overdue, and it tasted like salt from tears neither of them had known they were crying. Vivian made a small sound of surprise that turned into something else entirely, her hands coming up to frame his face, her fingers gentle on his skin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Miles rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted this since I was 19 years old and too afraid to believe someone like you could ever see someone like me. I'm still afraid. Still think you're making a mistake choosing me over everything else. But I'm tired of running, tired of being invisible, tired of teaching my daughter that people like us should be grateful for scraps. Then don't run, Vivian whispered. Stand with me. Help me rebuild this company into something worth leading. Teach music and raise your daughter, and let me figure out what it means to love someone without walls, without conditions, without all the corporate calculation I've used to keep myself safe. I don't know how to be what you need, Miles admitted. I don't know how to exist in your world without feeling like an imposter. Then we'll figure it out together. Build something new instead of trying to fit into something old. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes, and the vulnerability in her expression made his heart ache. I'm not asking you to be anything other than who you are, Miles. The teacher, the father, the musician who understands grief and beauty, and the spaces between. That's enough. You're enough. Those words, you're enough, hit him like absolution, like permission to stop apologizing for existing. Miles Carter, maintenance worker and failed pianist and single father barely keeping his head above water, was enough for Vivian Whitmore, Ice Queen CEO who'd just burned down her empire rather than let him disappear again. It shouldn't be possible. It defied every rule he'd learned about how the world worked, about the distance between people like her and people like him. But Lily was unpacking her stuffed animals in the next room, humming off-key and happy, and Vivian was looking at him like he'd hung the moon instead of just unclogged her toilets. And for the first time in 13 years, Miles let himself believe that maybe, impossibly, he deserved this. The next weeks were chaos of the best and worst kind. The media storm around Vivian's exposé didn't fade so much as transform, evolving from scandal to something more complex. Labor groups praised Whitmore Holdings' new safety initiatives and commitment to accountability. Shareholders filed lawsuits that were quietly settled. The board underwent restructuring that left Gordon Whitmore with less direct power and Vivian with a mandate to continue her reforms. Graham Pierce disappeared to a position at a firm in London, his departure accompanied by carefully worded press releases about pursuing new opportunities. Vivian's engagement ring was quietly donated to charity, the symbolism not lost on anyone paying attention. And Miles found himself navigating a world he'd never imagined inhabiting. He kept his teaching position, but Vivian arranged for proper compensation and benefits. The community music school received a substantial grant from the newly established Whitmore Foundation for Arts Education, allowing them to hire additional instructors and provide instruments to students who couldn't afford them. Miles's class sizes tripled, then quadrupled, until he was teaching 5 days a week to kids from across the city who'd never had access to quality music education. His students adored him. They didn't care that his right hand didn't work properly, that he couldn't demonstrate certain techniques, that he sometimes had to stop mid-lesson to rest his aching fingers. They cared that he understood what it meant to struggle, to feel invisible, to believe that talent without opportunity was just another kind of curse. They cared that he saw them, really saw them, and believed they could be more than their circumstances suggested. Dr. Castellano started attending the classes, officially to observe, unofficially to help Miles develop curriculum and teaching methods that worked around his limitations. The old man's presence lent legitimacy to the program, and soon other conservatory instructors were volunteering their time, treating the community school like a pipeline to identify overlooked talent. One of Miles's students, a 15-year-old girl named Rosa, who'd been teaching herself piano on a keyboard missing half its keys, was offered a full scholarship to the conservatory. Two others received funding for summer intensive programs. A boy with autism who struggled with verbal communication found his voice through music, his parents weeping as they thanked Miles for seeing potential where other teachers had only seen disability. Miles came home from those sessions exhausted and fulfilled in ways he'd forgotten were possible. And increasingly, he came home to find Vivian waiting, sitting on his sagging couch, helping Lily with homework, bringing takeout from restaurants Miles couldn't pronounce, just existing in his space like she belonged there. They were careful at first, aware of the scrutiny, the whispers, the way their relationship would be dissected by people who couldn't understand it. But slowly, carefully, they built something real. Vivian taught Lily chess and told her stories about running a company that made boardrooms sound like adventures. Lily taught Vivian how to braid hair and explained the complex social dynamics of second grade with the seriousness of a diplomat navigating international relations. And Miles watched them together, this impossible family forming in the ruins of everything he'd thought his life had to be, and felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Hope. 6 months after the Christmas party that had changed everything, Whitmore Holdings held its annual charity gala. This time, it wasn't just corporate networking disguised as philanthropy. The foundation Vivian had established was announcing its first round of grants, scholarships, and initiatives designed to provide opportunities to people the system had overlooked. Miles attended, not as maintenance staff, but as director of the community music program. He wore a suit Vivian had insisted on buying him, uncomfortable in the expensive fabric, but determined not to embarrass her. Lily came too, in a blue dress that made her look older than 7, her hand tight in his as they entered the glittering ballroom. The whispers followed them, would probably always follow them. The CEO and the maintenance worker, the ice queen and the nobody. The scandal that had become a strange kind of fairy tale, though not everyone approved of the ending. Gordon Whitmore attended but kept his distance, his relationship with his daughter civil but strained. Patricia Chen and several other board members went out of their way to greet Miles warmly, to ask about his students, to treat him like he mattered. Others looked through him the way they always had, unable to reconcile his current position with his past invisibility. Miles didn't care. He'd spent too many years measuring his worth by other people's recognition. Tonight he measured it by the students who'd sent him videos of their practice sessions, by the parents who'd thanked him for giving their children something to believe in, by the daughter holding his hand and the woman across the room who kept finding his eyes in the crowd like he was the only person there. The program began with speeches about corporate responsibility and social impact, delivered by people who'd spent their careers prioritizing profit over principles. Miles listened with half an ear, more interested in watching Lily's face as she tried to follow the adult conversation. Then Vivian took the stage, and the room went quiet. She looked magnificent in a silver gown that caught the light, her dark hair down for once, her expression open in a way that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Thank you all for being here tonight. Many of you know that this year has been one of significant change for Whitmore Holdings. We've had to confront uncomfortable truths about our practices, our priorities, and the cost of our success. And we've learned that real leadership isn't about maintaining power. It's about using that power to create opportunities for those who've been denied them. She paused, her eyes finding Miles in the crowd. Tonight, I want to introduce you to someone who taught me that lesson. Someone who's been in this building for years but was invisible to most of us. Someone whose talent and dedication we overlooked because we'd trained ourselves to only see value in certain places, certain faces, certain stories. Miles felt his face heat as every eye in the room turned to him. Miles Carter runs our community music program. He teaches students who've been told they're not good enough, not wealthy enough, not the right kind of person to deserve access to quality education. And he does it with a grace and generosity that shames every excuse we've made about why we can't do better. Vivian's voice was steady, but Miles could hear the emotion beneath. This foundation exists because Miles reminded me that the cost of our success can't be measured only in quarterly earnings. It has to be measured in the lives we impact, the opportunities we create, the people we choose to see instead of overlook. She gestured to the screen behind her where images began to play. Miles's students at their instruments, their faces lit with concentration and joy. Rosa performing at her conservatory audition. The boy with autism playing for his parents. Lily sitting at the piano beside her father, learning to read music. These are the faces of what's possible when we choose to invest in people instead of just profits. When we recognize that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity does not. When we stop asking, can we afford it, and start asking, how can we afford not to? The applause was thunderous, and Miles felt Lily squeeze his hand, her small face glowing with pride. Around them, people were standing, the ovation building until the entire ballroom was on its feet. Vivian descended from the stage and made her way through the crowd to where Miles stood, her hand extended. "Dance with me?" "I don't know how," he admitted, but he took her hand anyway. "Then we'll figure it out together," she said, and pulled him onto the dance floor as the orchestra began to play. They moved awkwardly at first, Miles hyper-conscious of his damaged hand on her waist, of the hundreds of eyes watching them. But Vivian just smiled and rested her head against his shoulder, and gradually he stopped caring about anything except the woman in his arms and the music swelling around them. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for seeing me, for fighting for me, for making me believe I was worth fighting for." "Thank you for finishing the song," she whispered back, "for giving me music when I needed it most, for reminding me who I used to be before I forgot that being untouchable just meant being alone." They swayed together as the music built, and Miles closed his eyes and let himself exist in this moment, impossible and perfect and more than he'd ever dared to dream. When the song ended, Lily appeared at their side, tugging on Vivian's dress. "Can we go see the piano now? You promised." Vivian laughed. "I did promise, didn't I?" The three of them made their way to a side room where the same grand piano from the Christmas party sat waiting. It had been moved here for the gala, intended for background music during dinner, but Lily had other ideas. "Daddy should play," she announced to the small crowd that had followed them. "He should play the song, the one that started everything." Miles looked at the piano, then at Vivian, then at his daughter, who believed he could do anything. "Lily, I don't know if—" "Please, Daddy, everyone should hear it. Everyone should know that you wrote something beautiful." Vivian's hat found his, squeezed gently. "Only if you want to. No pressure, no expectations, just possibility." Miles sat down at the piano bench, his heart hammering, his damaged hand trembling slightly as it found the keys. He'd played this song exactly twice in 13 years, once in an empty practice room while grieving his friend, once at a Christmas party while trying to soothe his daughter to sleep. Now he would play it for the woman he loved, the daughter who believed in him, and a room full of strangers who would finally know that the quiet boy in the shadows had mattered all along. His fingers found the opening notes. Evan's movement, brilliant and passionate and full of hope. He played it as faithfully as he could, honoring his friend's vision, letting that golden optimism fill the room. Then he moved into the second movement, the one he'd written in the depths of grief. The melody darkened, grew more complex, built on themes of loss and longing and the kind of love that knew it would never be returned. But this time, instead of ending there, instead of letting the music fade into melancholy acceptance, Miles added something new. A fourth movement he'd written in his head during the long nights after Vivian had fought for him, after she'd chosen him, after she'd taught him that endings could become beginnings if you had the courage to keep playing. The new movement started soft, tentative, like someone testing whether hope was safe to hold. Then it built, layer by layer, as the melody found its courage. It wove together threads from Evan's opening and Miles's grief, transforming them into something neither sad nor simply happy, but real. Complex. Honest. A love story that acknowledged pain without being defined by it, that chose joy without pretending sorrow had never existed. It was a song about second chances, about being seen, about building families from the wreckage of everything you thought you had to be. When the final notes faded, the room was silent. Then Lily started clapping, her small hands loud in the quiet, and gradually others joined until the applause washed over Miles like absolution. He looked up to find Vivian crying, her makeup smudged, her perfect composure shattered, and she'd never looked more beautiful. "That ending," she said, her voice breaking. "The fourth movement. When did you—" "Last night, after you fell asleep on my couch with Lily's head in your lap and her homework scattered everywhere. I looked at you both and realized that the song didn't have to end in longing, that maybe, impossibly, it could end in answered prayers instead." Vivian crossed to him, framed his face with her hands, and kissed him in front of everyone, board members and business partners and society columnists who would write about this for weeks. "I love you," she said when they broke apart, loud enough for the room to hear. "I love you, and I don't care who knows it. I don't care what anyone thinks. You're the best thing that's happened to me in 13 years, and I'm not apologizing for choosing you." "I love you too," Miles said, because there was no point in hiding anymore, in making himself smaller, in accepting that people like him didn't get to have this. "I've loved you since I was 19 and too afraid to say it. I'm not afraid anymore." Lily wedged herself between them, her arms around both their waists. "Does this mean Vivian is going to be my second mom? Because Emma says you can have more than one mom if they all love you enough." Miles and Vivian looked at each other over Lily's head, and something passed between them. A question, an answer, a promise of futures they'd write together one day at a time. "Maybe," Vivian said softly, "if that's something you'd want, if that's something your dad would want." "I want it," Lily said immediately. "I want a family that's bigger than just me and Daddy. I want someone to help with homework and braid my hair and tell me stories about running companies. I want you." Vivian's tears started fresh, and she knelt down to Lily's level. "Then you've got me. For as long as you both want me. I promise." Miles pulled them both close, this impossible family he'd somehow been given, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless his entire life. He'd spent 32 years being nobody, accepting less, teaching himself that wanting more was dangerous. But Lily deserved to see him fight for happiness, deserved to learn that love wasn't about settling or hiding or making yourself invisible so other people could shine brighter. And Vivian deserved someone who'd finished her songs, who'd seen her clearly when everyone else had only seen what they wanted to see, who'd loved her quietly and without expectation for 13 years, and would love her loudly and without fear for the rest of their lives. 1 year later, Whitmore Holdings held another charity gala, this one in a different venue to accommodate the expanded foundation programs. The community music school had grown to serve 300 students. Miles had hired 4 additional instructors and was developing curriculum for a citywide initiative. Rosa had won a prestigious youth competition. 2 more of his students had received conservatory scholarships. And in the corner of the ballroom, a small display honored Evan Hale, not as a tragedy, but as the beginning of something beautiful. His opening movement was played on loop, followed by Miles's completion, followed by the new 4th movement that had become the Foundation's unofficial anthem. The display included a photograph from 13 years ago, Evan at the piano, brilliant and golden and gone too soon. And in the background, barely visible, a dark-haired boy watching from the shadows. But next to that photograph was a new one, taken just last week. Miles at the community school piano, surrounded by students, Lily perched on the bench beside him, and Vivian standing just behind with her hand on his shoulder. In this photo, Miles wasn't in the shadows. He was front and center, his damaged hand resting on the keys, his face lit with the kind of joy that only came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged. The quiet boy who'd thought he was nobody had learned to take up space, to be seen, to accept that his life could be a melody worth playing, even if it came with broken keys and unexpected harmonies. Miles stood in the ballroom with Vivian's hand in his, watching Lily dance with Dr. Castellano, and thought about the Christmas Eve that had changed everything. One song, played for a sleeping child, had shattered carefully constructed walls and revealed truths they'd both been hiding. "What are you thinking?" Vivian asked, her thumb tracing circles on his palm. "That I'm grateful," Miles said honestly. That if I could go back 13 years and change things, if I could save my hand, skip the warehouse accident, avoid all the pain. I wouldn't. Because all of it led here. To you, to Lily, to this. Even the parts where you thought you were nobody? Even those. Because they taught me what actually matters. Not talent or success or being remembered. Just showing up for the people who need you and letting yourself be loved by the people who see you. He turned to face her fully, both hands holding hers now, despite the crooked fingers and the scars. You see me, Vivian. You always have, even when I was working so hard to be invisible. Thank you for not looking away. Thank you for staying visible even when it was terrifying, she said, and kissed him soft and slow and sweet. Thank you for teaching me that being untouchable just meant being alone. Thank you for reminding me that the best things in life are the ones worth fighting for, worth burning empires for, worth rebuilding yourself around. Across the room, Gordon Whitmore watched his daughter with an expression caught between resignation and reluctant approval. He'd never fully understand her choice, would never see Miles as anything but the maintenance worker who'd upended carefully laid plans. But he'd stopped fighting it, had started to recognize that Vivian was happier now than she'd been in the decade before Miles returned to her life. That had to count for something. The evening ended with Miles performing one final piece, not the song that had started everything, but something new he'd been working on. A composition for 3 hands, playable, despite his limitations, designed to be taught to students who thought disability meant the end of possibility. He played it with Lily beside him, her small hands finding the melody while his provided harmony. They stumbled occasionally, had to restart once when Lily lost her place, but they finished together, the final notes hanging in the air like a question answered. The applause was warm and genuine, and as Miles stood and bowed with Lily's hand in his, he caught Vivian's eyes across the room. She was crying again, but smiling too, and mouthing 3 words he'd never expected to hear from anyone, let alone from her. "You're my home." Miles mouthed back the same words, and knew with absolute certainty that they were true. He'd spent his life searching for belonging in music, in love, and being good enough to deserve recognition. But home wasn't about being perfect or successful or remembered by history. Home was Lily's laughter and Vivian's fierce protection, and the students who looked at him like he'd given them permission to believe in themselves. Home was teaching kids to make music in a scarred upright piano in a community center that smelled like floor polish and possibility. Home was waking up next to a woman who'd chosen him over empires and never regretted it for a single second. Home was being seen, being loved, being enough exactly as you were. As they left the gala that night, Miles, Vivian, and Lily walking out together into the winter cold, it started to snow. The same kind of snow that had been falling the night everything changed, when a maintenance worker had played a lullaby and an ice queen had remembered what it felt like to hope. Lily caught snowflakes on her tongue while Miles and Vivian walked hand in hand, and somewhere in the quiet of the falling snow, you could almost hear it, a melody that started in grief, transformed through love, and ended in the kind of joy that only came from having the courage to keep playing even when the music seemed lost forever. It was the song of second chances, of being nobody and becoming someone, of learning that the truest kind of success wasn't measured in quarterly earnings or corner offices or being untouchable. It was measured in moments like this, snow falling, a child laughing, 2 people who'd spent 13 years finding their way back to each other, and a future they'd write together one note at a time. The song wasn't finished, it would never be finished, but it was theirs, and it was real, and it was more than enough.